Hello, everyone, and I hope you are all having a great day whenever you are watching this. Today, we're going to be going over the slides for the Black Death, also known as the plague or the bubonic plague, as we'll talk about. But before we get into that, I did want to make you guys aware that you should have your fill in the blank notes open, which you can find here, as well as there'll be a Black Death and education exit ticket. This just asks you a few multiple choice questions I expect you to fill out for the full credit. And then you will also have a bubonic plague journal. This comes with directions and a rubric so you can make sure that you are filling everything out how it should be and are taking all the steps to get the best grade possible through reading the rubric, understanding that turning it on time gets you 25 points, following all the directions, including 3 to 5 sentences, will get you 25 points. But to look at the actual template itself, this is what you'll see. You all have gotten a copy of this. You will simply write 3 to 5 sentences on your location and social status. Going back to the directions and rubric, you can see I included some questions like, where do you live? Where are you in society? Remembering that activity we did where you found out whether you were a noble, a serf, or a lord. Or as we'll talk about the clergy, talking about the role of religion at this time. And then also, how much money do you have? So this also impacts where you fall in society and talking about how this will impact your health and the rest of the world, which will be the second slide. Oh, not that one. The second slide is how's your health and what is going on in your neighborhood. And here in the directions, you'll see I ask, how are you feeling? Do you have the plague? What is going on in your neighborhood? And what do you see happening around you? So, as we discuss throughout this lecture, you'll learn some more information about the plague or the Black Death that you can use in your sentences. And then the last, which you'll see in the slides, is survival and recovery. And again, in the directions, the questions, did you survive? Why or why not? How will you recover? And in what ways did the plague impact you and your family? Here, I want you to use in the slideshow, in all of these, I want you to use creativity, fonts, colors, shapes, pictures to help really make this a journal as if you were living through the plague. And in context, I guess you could say you're living through one sort of plague with COVID. So you might even tie in some of your modern experiences to some ancient experiences or medieval experiences. So jumping right into the PowerPoint, let's get started. This is a relatively short PowerPoint, so we should move quickly, but we have a lot of stuff to cover. So the Black Death. You might have heard about the plague, or you might have heard of the song "Ring Around the Rosies." When we're children and we're singing the song or playing along to "Ring Around the Rosies," this actually has ties back to the Black Death, being that, as we'll learn, where the Black Death comes from, when fleas and rats would bite you, you would get this ring, tying back to a ring around the posy. And then posy was a sort of flower that you ring around the rosy, excuse me. And it would be a red circle with a ring around it where you got bit by the flea that was either infested with the bacteria. And it was often brought by the rats through trade, as we'll talk about, thinking about fleas and, their attachment to rodents or animals of any kind like dogs. So ring around the rosies and then pocket full of posies to fend off from the smell of death surrounding Europe. People would put flowers in their boutonnieres and such in order to distract them from the smell. So getting into some of the stuff I was just introducing, the Black Death is also known as the bubonic plague. It's traced again to those who were infected by a flea or tick bite, and then it started in trade posts. So the fleas and the ticks would latch on to these rats who had If you listen to the song I posted, it's in there. It's Yestis, I think, something. I'm not great with scientific terms. There's a reason I'm a history teacher and not a science teacher. But these fleas and ticks would jump onto these rats and get the bacteria from the different rats and then bite people. And this started in the trade post. So, thinking back to what we talked about in the Crusades, how this was a major time for trade because people were going all throughout Constantinople. And there was a more mix of culture that we're starting to see. And then as trade happens, we see that people are carrying goods and traveling in ships and caravans, which these rats hop into. And ultimately, the Black Death caused Europe's population to decline by 33%. So, thinking about this, 1 out of 3 of you would likely have died in this pandemic. Pretty morbid, pretty fatal, not a great time to be in Europe. And again, this shows a picture of how it spread throughout Europe. So, starting first in 1347 in Sicily. So, thinking about Italy, uh, what did we call an area of land surrounded by 3 sides of water? I hope you were thinking a peninsula because that's exactly what Italy is. And what does water help with, especially having ports near the water? I hope you were thinking trade because that is exactly right. And so, with all this trade happening, especially in Italy, and because of their access to ports, we see it starting there and then spreading out through Venice, and then in 1348 in Paris, and quickly hitting in 1352, just a few years later, in Moscow, Russia. So, looking at how far Sicily over here is away from Moscow. These are some pictures. Do these pictures look old to you guys? Like, do these look like they came out of the medieval times? No, they don't. They're modern pictures, and the plague is still a rare but a disease that is still able to be contracted today. And it usually starts in these appendages, lower appendages, like your fingers. There is a vaccine for it, but given that it's so rare, um, very few people are likely to need or have the vaccine. And so some of the impacts of the Black Death, it usually impacted the lower working class. And why do you think this was? Because the lower and working class were the ones working these ports, working the trade. And when they got sick, and many quickly died, there was a shortage of labor that was created. And due to the shortage of labor, the feudal system or feudalism declined throughout Europe. And now workers could choose who to work for and who would pay the most. Because the population, again, thinking about this decrease of population, there was less people overall. And so there was more time to hone in skills, hone in real job traits, I guess you could say, as such as pay and interest. And then the influence of the church declined because, again, thinking back to religion, asking those questions, how could God let this happen? Why were the good dying and what did they do to deserve this? Especially coming out of the Crusades when so many people that fought in the Crusades, again, the Pope promised them salvation, promised they would be saved in the eyes of God. So now they have the plague and they're like, what the heck? What did we do? What did we do now? We served in the Crusades. We did everything we could. And now we're all dying. So again, thinking about how this weakens the role of the church. And then trade routes were disrupted because why go to a town that was infected? And thinking about where all of this really started with these trade routes and these paths and rats jumping onto the caravans and the ships, things that were traveling to ports and traveling to other cities. So these port cities, especially coastal, like really fell off because why would people want to go there? And why would people want to trade? So here's some pictures representing just sickness, the shortage of labor, working for people who would actually pay. Thinking about again how we learned in our last in China and Africa about China and the paper money, tying everything back. You're seeing how history really becomes a story. Everything is either a cause or effect of another. And then for our last side, let's get some learning on. So during the Middle Ages, not a lot of people were educated, as we talked about with the Crusades. Whatever the Pope told you, you believed. So if the Pope was preaching that you needed to go fight in these holy wars, then you were going to go fight in these holy wars. And if he promised you salvation, you were obviously going to believe him. And so this shows that education was for the clergy. And this should be one of your vocab words. But if it's not clergy or church officials, such as the Pope, such as priests, they're the ones really able to read this Latin. And again, most of the population uneducated and couldn't even read or write, another term for that being illiterate. But remembering going back to even our early Middle Ages when we talked about the role of monasteries and remembering Our Lady, Our Lady, what I don't know what we would call her. There was Saint Scholastica, though. I really enjoyed her name, the one who created a monastery for women. This is where ancient literature and those ties back to our Roman tradition and Greek ideals were held. So again, remembering that they translated Greek and Arabic works into Latin here. And there was new knowledge gained. So we have new ideas of philosophy, medicine, and science. And why do you think these things came about, especially medicine and science during the time of the Black Death? Because even if you prayed, that didn't prevent, say your son or your brother from dying. And so we put more value into figuring out medicinal practices, how to make yourself feel better through, I don't know, a warm cup of tea or warm washcloths, things that were more physical than just spiritual. And an illuminated manuscript. These are handwritten books with painted decoration. You might see them on old fairy tale books, or if you go to Barnes and Noble like that and look in those sections, they'll be adorned with precious metals like gold and silver. So thinking back to our West African gold and salt trade on the Trans-Saharan trade route, how people got their gold, and thinking about then how trade caused the Black Death really with bringing these infected rats over. And these illuminated manuscripts are really what held information on philosophy, medicine, science, our new Enlightenment ideals. And then we see the foundations of universities in Europe. So as this is right before the Renaissance, we'll talk about these new ideals as far as a rebirth of knowledge, going back to more Greek kind of learning, like thoughts, thinking about thoughts, and also just progressing society as far as ideas. And we start to see more work with people like Galileo and Isaac Newton talking about science. And also politics is brought up. So we see this kind of reemergence of the world, essentially, especially Europe, coming out of this late Middle Ages. But other than that, that's it for this set of slides, you guys. If you have any questions or concerns, as always, reach out to me at kingb@ameliaschools.com. But until next time, I enjoy teaching you all, and I hope you learned something from these videos. All right, bye.